We go back to the 2024 NBA offseason, which was the most recent one. The New York Knicks and the Minnesota Timberwolves, they hit us with one of the most shocking trades in NBA history, and that trade essentially was Karl Anthony Towns being shipped to the New York Knicks in exchange from Dante DiVincenzo, Julius Randle, and a first-round draft pick. And also, the Charlotte Hornets participated in this deal as well to make it a three-team deal to help get things done, but that essentially was what this trade was. Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle in exchange for Karl Anthony Towns. Now, these moves came to a shock to me from both franchises for a couple of reasons, but the biggest reason is the postseason run that both teams were coming off of. We look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, who were coming off their best postseason run in franchise history, knocking off Kevin Durant and Devin Booker in the first round with a sweep, and then going to the second round facing the defending champions, knocking off Nikola Jokic in a Game 7 where they were down 20 points, came back to win that game, get to the conference finals where they ultimately came up short. So for that right there, having their best postseason run and Karl Anthony Towns being one of their pillars, one of their cornerstones, and such a big part of their identity, I didn't see them moving on from him that soon. And then we look at the other side, the postseason run that the New York Knicks had made. Now, they didn't get to the conference finals, but it was because they were hit with a plethora of injuries. And even when they had most of their guys out of the lineup, the New York Knicks still looked extremely impressive, especially Jalen Brunson. I had a buddy that I talked with that we like to argue about basketball. I was telling him that Jalen Brunson, to me, he was looking like the best player in the playoffs. Like, pound for pound, Jalen Brunson was looking like the best player in the playoffs. So I'm thinking, if Jalen Brunson, he didn't even have most of his squad, imagine what it would look like if most of these guys were healthy. But obviously the New York Knicks, they had a different vision, and they decided to take a risk and shake things up. So that's what we seen. We seen these two teams make this deal, and at the time, I'm not gonna lie, I was a little bit skeptical, because looking at it initially, I just don't know how either teams become drastically better. But that was until the season played out, and it's been a rocky season for both of these teams. But they, right now in the present day, both of these teams are hitting their stride at a very elite level, and the two main players, or I should say the three main players, Dante DiVincenzo as well, but all three of these guys are making all of the differences in the world for these two franchises in their postseason runs right now. But we look at the risk that both teams were taking with these players, because these are not just, Karl Anthony Towns and Julius Randle. They aren't perfect basketball players, and both franchises were taking a risk in terms of fit and the identity that both teams already had established. And we look at a player like Julius Randle, and these are just things that were said about him, but he was considered to be a ball dominant, ISO heavy ball player, and you don't know if that's the best, a player like that is the best fit for a player like Anthony Edwards, putting that alongside Anthony Edwards. But the Minnesota Timberwolves, they believed in the leadership of Anthony Edwards, and they also believed that they could make Julius Randle take this fresh start and retool his game and make him a lot more effective on the offensive side of the ball, which we're going to get into. But that risk that they were taking, bringing in Julius Randle and him just not fitting along Anthony Edwards on the offensive side of the ball. And then we look at the New York Knicks bringing in Karl Anthony Towns. Now, what the New York Knicks did bringing in Karl Anthony Towns, they essentially replaced Isaiah Hartenstein with Karl Anthony Towns, and then Mitchell Robinson was going to be, they known going into the season, Mitchell Robinson was going to be gone for majority of this year. So that's where I thought the New York Knicks were taking a risk at, just bringing in Karl Anthony Towns, who's not known for much of a rim protector. He was going to be your last line of defense for a huge chunk of the season, and we did see Karl Anthony Towns struggle a little bit throughout the season with foul trouble and also protecting the rim. But all in all, it still worked out tremendously for the New York Knicks. They finished with a better record than they had last year, with outstanding efforts from Karl Anthony Towns. He had so many monstrous games this season, and just like Julius Randle, this fresh start has been a blessing for Karl Anthony Towns as well, because he has a much clearer offensive role with the New York Knicks, and he also has much better spacing to be a post scorer and also be a stretch big at the same time. So that's why it was a little bit shocking to me at first. Both teams were, kind of not only revamping their team, but also revamping their style of play and revamping their identity. And I would say so far far, it worked out tremendously for both teams, and it was kind of hard to judge both of these moves throughout the season because both teams were never at full strength. When we look at the New York Knicks and we look at Mitchell Robinson being out for a majority of the season, just imagine how much better the New York Knicks, when we see all the impact that Mitchell Robinson has played in the limited minutes, because he is coming back from a pretty critical injury, but when he's out there on the court, I believe last night against the Boston Celtics in the first half alone, he had like 5 or 6 offensive rebounds. So his impact of play against the Detroit Pistons, my Detroit Pistons, and the Boston Celtics, it has been big time this season. So having him on that front line this year could have made made the New York Knicks look even better than what they did this regular season. And also, we look on the flip side with the Minnesota Timberwolves. They also dealt with injuries throughout this season, so it was kind of hard to judge them, to fully judge them on the move that they made around Donte DiVincenzo and Julius Randle, because they had times where Randle was out for periods of time. They had times where Rudy Gobert was out for periods of time. Donte DiVincenzo missed some time this season. So now that we see both teams at full strength and we see both teams competing in the playoffs, and it's fascinating to see that we have two teams who traded with each other, who is on a trajectory right now to both get to the conference finals in opposite conferences. We have the New York Knicks in the Eastern Conference, and we have the Minnesota Timberwolves in the Western Conference. And another crazy coincidence is that both of these teams right now are up 3-1 on their opponents, the New York Knicks. And I thought the New York Knicks, their most recent win in their playoff series, I thought that was their most impressive win in the postseason all season long, because it looked like watching game 1 and 2, the New York Knicks, they go down by 20 points in those games. And it's also kind of like, and I'm not taking any credit away from the New York Knicks, but it's kind of like the Boston Celtics. They collapsed in those games, and then we see the Boston Celtics, we see them come out and they win game 3, and I thought game 4 was so crucial for the New York Knicks to go out and get that win, because that win right there could have shifted all the momentum, and they knew they were going to get their best punch from Jason Tatum and the Boston Celtics. And Jason Tatum was going crazy. He had 40-plus points before he went down with his injury, but with the way things were looking, it looked like, despite that crazy performance, the New York Knicks were going to take that win. So I thought that win right there, because it could have got away from them. It could have been, the lead could have ballooned a couple of times, but they stayed in it, and then the second half, they got real aggressive, and they became the aggressor against the Boston Celtics, and they closed the deal. And I thought that win right there, it said a lot about this New York Knicks team, and they got huge contributions from Karl Anthony Towns. He was extremely aggressive. He was extremely efficient. He put pressure on that Boston front court all night long, and he was hitting the boards really hard. And so this is kind of what we talked about. This is kind of what we was just talked about a little bit earlier with the New York Knicks, because you have Jalen Brunson. I talked about how, to me, pound for pound, he looked like the best player in the NBA playoffs. He's just so relentless in his attack. He's going to play 46, 47 minutes, all 46 of those minutes. He's going to be so relentless on putting pressure on the defense, and it just makes life so hard for whoever has that assignment. It looks very terrifying, because he's not only, breaking you down with dribble moves, but he's going to take you down to the post, where a lot of people don't realize how strong Jalen Brunson is. So like we said, we see Jalen Brunson, imagine him crewed up with his guys alongside him, with his teammates healthy, and we don't know how good this New York Knicks team could be. And now we're seeing that they're up 3-1 on the defending champs, the Boston Celtics, who everyone still had coming out of the Eastern Conference. And then we look to the other side of this trade. We look what's going on. In the Minnesota Timberwolves postseason run. Nothing but excellence, and it's kind of the same thing that's going on with the New York Knicks. They're getting heavy contributions from that trade that they made with that opposite franchise. We look at what Julius Randle and Donte DiVincenzo has been to the Minnesota Timberwolves this postseason, and when I look at these two players, I love the lineup flexibility that they have with Donte DiVincenzo and Julius Randle, as opposed to Karl Anthony Towns. And that's not to put Cat down in any way, but basketball is about personnel and it is about fit. But what I see with Julius Randle being on the Minnesota Timberwolves now, they have so many different lineups that they can make, because because Julius Randle in today's NBA, he can be a 3 or 4 or a 5, but primarily the Minnesota Timberwolves, they use him as a 4, and now Naz Reid has become that player that gets to become a 4 or a 5 man. And when Naz Reid and Julius Randle was on the basketball court together, that is very, very hard to guard because both of those guys are perimeter players. They're perimeter ball handlers that can attack downhill, and then they're very skilled big man and they can pass the ball. So I love the different combinations between between Julius Randle and Naz Reid. And then also Rudy Gobert is a lot more effective if it's Naz Reid and Rudy Gobert, or if it's Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert. Those combinations for the Timberwolves have been really good, as well. And then also Dante DiVincenzo, he provides much needed 3-point shooting for the Minnesota Timberwolves and much needed floor spacing. He's a really good combo guard. He can play alongside Ant-Man Anthony Edwards, or he can run that show full time with the second unit. And then the Minnesota Timberwolves, they still have guys like Mike Conley, who is so underrated. They have Jaden McDaniels, who has been big time in the playoffs this year. And the Minnesota Timberwolves, they just been really impressive in these playoffs. When everybody had the Lakers beating them, they beat the hell out of the Lakers, and Julius Randle was big time. His ability to wear down LeBron James offensively and defensively, and then against the Golden State Warriors, providing scoring punches. Stephen Curry may be out, but that makes the Golden State Warriors a much tougher defensive team, and it's going to make these games a lot more grittier and a lot harder to score the ball. And Julius Randle in these last 2 games, he has been phenomenal. Game 4, he drops 31 points, and in game 3, he drops a triple-double. So this has really been a revolution for Julius Randle. We look at his other 2 postseason. We look at these other 2 postseason runs that he's been on. He hasn't played nowhere near as well as he's playing right now. So this fresh start has been big time for Julius Randle. It has been big time for Karl-Anthony Towns. It has been big time for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and it has been big time for the New York Knicks, because we look at these teams right now. I think they're both destined to make the conference finals. I think it would take, and not to jinx these guys in any way, but I think it would take something catastrophic to happen for these 2 teams to not meet up in the conference finals. And imagine how crazy it would be if they met up in the NBA finals. That would be wild. But I just want to talk about that today. I've never seen a trade work this evenly for both teams this immediately. I can't wait to see how far these 2 teams go. But if you guys enjoy it, please leave a like, comment down below if you agree or disagree, and then subscribe for more weekly content. We do this all the time, man. And that's curtains.